So, some of you know me, and you know that I have one daughter, and it is honestly the joy of my life to get to be her dad. So I'm going to tell you a little story, and this has no bearing on her. This is all about me. Many years ago, when she was maybe 3 or 4 years old, I decided to take her and give her mom a little free time, and so we went to run some errands. So, of course, I strapped her into the car seat, which is much like strapping her into a NASCAR chair, and off we went for a couple hours of time together. Well, as things often happen when you are traveling around the Claremont area, in traffic, in people, the errands took way longer than anticipated. And the next thing you know, as we are heading to the next store that we had to go to, my daughter is whispering, not really whispering, the 3 dreaded words from the back seat. I guess it's not 3 words, it's 2. I'm hungry. It could have been 3 words if it was I am hungry. Despite my best efforts to calm her and tell her that we would be home soon, because of course that always works when you just say, don't worry about how hungry you are, that did not pay off. Her sense of urgency just continued to escalate, and it turned into crying and declaring with even more authority, I am hungry. And by the way, just as an aside, my daughter to this day is so good at being hangry. But at least now she can make her own noodles. I'm guessing that's probably something that she got from me, but that's a whole nother discussion. So as she upped her emotional display, my agitation as well was peaking. And so with firmness, maybe bordering on frustration, I told her, stop crying! Right? Because when somebody tells you to do that, you immediately stop crying. We'll be home soon and you can have all the food you want at that point. I had my good parenting skills on full display for her and I to see. So here's why I relate this story of my ineptness as a parent is although that I was feeling angry and frustrated, and in all honesty, my daughter was probably feeling like this was directed at her, it was really myself that I was mad at. And I was responding to that internal voice of mine. And that voice was saying, you are a bad dad. A good dad would have thought to pack a snack, right? A good dad would not snap at his daughter just for being hungry. You don't deserve to have your daughter love you. And that was what was going on in repeat in my brain as my daughter was crying out from the back seat that she just wanted to have some goldfish. Instead of seeing through the lens of I just made a mistake or a lack of preparation and foresight, this turned into an attack on who I was. So last week we started a series called How Are You Really? And we are taking the next few weeks to look under the surface of who we are and address some things related to our emotional and our spiritual health. And in last week's message that I had the privilege to be able to deliver, we focused on our emotions and the value that there is for us in developing awareness about what we're experiencing and when we're experiencing it so that we can intentionally begin to change our focus and to do something about the fruit of our emotions. So this week, what I want to take a look at is something that's really related to the emotions we experience, and that is the core lies that motivate our behavior, that affect our emotions, that really impact our relationships and everything that goes on around us. So our core lies, they are those narratives that play like a record in our brain. And now you're thinking, what in the world is a record? So like a cassette tape. No, that's not right either. How about like a CD player? Well, that's even kind of a little outmoded. So it's like a USB player going on in your brain. Okay, it's telling you something over and over. Sometimes we don't even feel like we can control these lies, that they are just bursting into our brain at the worst possible moment. So this is telling us what we believe to be the truth about us, and also about how people around us view who we are. So my incident with trying to starve my daughter for an afternoon ignited one of those narratives that I have that goes on in myself, that I battle. And here it is. Okay, this is one of the core falsehoods that I fight in my life over and over. I am only worth of approval if I perform well. And that day with my daughter in the back seat, I was definitely not performing well. And my daughter was telling me so by her tears and by her crankiness. And I was also telling me so through those lies that go on, that I am not worthy of approval because I failed in this instance. This lie that I was so subjected to impacted my marriage. I spent so much time trying to earn love and approval from my wife, and hence to get the results I wanted through performing well. It also affected my work, whether it was at the college I worked in with the students, or whether it was at the church I was working with and the people I work with. I just strove to not disappoint those around me. And that's the lie. And that's the exhaustion it led to. And that's the feeling of never being enough that I lived in. And so I'm hoping that there's a little bit of you that can see yourself in my situation. The lies that you succumb to, or that you repeat to yourself over and over, that cause you to feel that you are not approved of or not worthy of being loved. I want to read to you some words of Jesus. This is in John chapter 8, verse 44. Jesus is talking to his opponents, people that were actively against him, and he was giving this description of his enemy. And this is what Jesus says: "For you," meaning his opponents, "are the children of your father, the devil, and you love to do the evil things he does. He was a murderer from the beginning. He has always hated the truth because there's no truth in him. When he lies, it is consistent with his character, for he is a liar and the father of lies." See, in this description that Jesus gives, we see that there is an intimate relationship between our emotional and our spiritual life. And this is one of the areas where it's on full display. The enemy of Jesus, and as we walk in Christ, the enemy of us is a liar. This is his identity. This is the only thing he knows to do. This is the only play that the enemy has in his playbook. But it's so effective against us. So for the devil, for Jesus' enemy, lying is the only language he knows. So for us, we can see that the devil is the original author of disinformation, or fake news, or misinformation, whatever the trendy word for it is right now. He lies to us about God, he lies to us about Jesus, and he lies to us about ourselves. And so this impacts our perception of who we are and what our significance is and how we can earn it. I want to go, like we did last week, all the way back to the beginning. We're going to hit Genesis chapter 3 again. And so I'm going to read to you verse 1 in this chapter, and then also verses 4 and 5. And if you remember last week, we talked about briefly the emotions related in Eve and in Adam as they finally ate of the forbidden fruit and what happened afterward. And so what we're going to see today is what occurred just prior. What convinced them to go ahead and take that first bite that they should not have? So here it is, Genesis chapter 3, verse 1. The serpent, the enemy, was the shrewdest of all the wild animals the Lord God had made. One day he asked the woman, did God really say you must not eat the fruit from any of the trees in the garden? Skipping to verse 4. This is again the serpent speaking. You won't die. The serpent replied to the woman, God knows that your eyes will be opened as soon as you eat it, and you will be like God, knowing both good and evil. So here's where our battle all started. This is the lie that convinced the woman to eat the fruit. And it starts off with, did God really say? Can God really be trusted? Is God really good and for you and in your corner and seeking what's best for you? Is God not just really pulling one over on you in this situation? And as we saw last week, Eve believed the lies about God, and as a result, they were introduced to lies about themselves. That's why they went and jumped and covered themselves with fig leaves. That was protection. All of a sudden, the lie started rolling around in their brain. I'm not enough. I'm not good enough. I'm a disappointment. Or any one of innumerable other falsehoods that they could have said. And so here's something that we see from this. What we believe about God and what we believe about ourselves is linked together. Now, this has been known throughout the history of theology. So I just want to read to you some statements from pretty famous theologians that show that knowing God and knowing what's going on in the core of ourselves are related. This is John Calvin, very famous theologian. And he wrote at the very beginning of his most famous work, there is no deep knowing of God without a deep knowing of self, and not deep knowing of self without a deep knowing of God. Both of those things go hand in hand, is what he is saying. Thomas à Kempis, in his book, Imitation of Christ, said a humble self-knowledge. So we're not talking about a knowledge that puffs us up. He's talking about a knowledge that comes from our humility, is a surer way to God than a search after deep learning. So knowing more about what is going on in us and how we are broken and what our lies are is going to help us know more about God as we address those things. Augustine, he wrote, or he prayed and wrote, grant, Lord, that I may know myself, that I may know thee. So what he's saying is the more he knew who he was, the more he knew how he was bent out of shape, the more he was going to know the goodness of God. So in the garden and in our own lives, the enemy has put knowledge about ourselves and about God out of balance. And so what we saw in the reaction of Adam and Eve is that without God, without faith in his goodness, they fell for the lies about God and about themselves. And we do the same thing. And so here are some of the lies that we are susceptible to. This is not a complete list. I wouldn't have time to go through a complete list. But what I'm just hoping is to jog in you the ability to discern what is it that you are falling for. What is the lie of the enemy in your life that you are seeking to prove is not true by your actions? Is it the lie that I am unwanted, or I am a failure, I am defective, I am unlovable, I am a fraud, I have no purpose, I am a disappointment, I am ugly, I am forgettable, or here's one that's going on in our culture right now, I am perfect just the way I am. See, all of these lies come from the mindset of scarcity. That there's not going to be enough, so I have to protect myself so that I don't lose more. And honestly, this is just a really backwards form of pride. To think that we actually could be perfect, or to meet all of our own needs or somebody else's needs, or to be something we weren't created to be. All of these lies are communicating to us our pride that we have to be addressed. So in my situation with my daughter, I made a mistake. I made a bad decision. And I then projected that I am a bad dad. And I could easily have given you an example where the lie in me would have said I'm a bad husband, or I'm a bad pastor, or I'm a bad son, or I'm just a regular old bad person. So what's the lie that's going on in you? As I'm going through all this, what is the statement about who you are that you are most likely to believe because it's been with you from the beginning? The next question is, well, okay, I see it. It's plain as day. I probably didn't have to even ask you that last question. It's probably on your mind already. How are these lies formed in us? Well, I don't have a whole lot of time to dive into relational system theory. We could do a workshop on it sometime if you want, because it's pretty fascinating. But what happens is, as we are young and impressionable, our parents, our guardians, our authority figures, our siblings, the media all around us, memorable circumstances imprint emotions on us. And we learn life lessons from them about how we measure up and how to get what we need, or how to avoid things that we don't want. And then these lessons, they are passed on from generation to generation. In fact, there's an example in the Bible. Actually, there's a couple good examples of this in the Bible, but probably the clearest one occurs in Genesis. So we know Abraham and Sarah, they are the ones that God gave the promise to. Your descendants are going to be as numerous as the stars in the sky. Well, while they were trying to make that promise happen by themselves, Abraham and Sarah's maidservant had a son named Ishmael. Well, God wasn't too pleased with this, but he gave him another chance, and they had their own son named Isaac, the son of the promise. Well, he became the favorite son. And because he was the favorite son, Sarah got jealous, and she forced Ishmael out of the family. He had to go out on his own. Well, this pattern gets sent down through generation to generation. Okay, Isaac, who is Abraham and Sarah's son, he reproduced this. Of his two sons, Esau and Jacob, Isaac had a favorite son, Esau. And because of the family dynamic there, Jacob was forced to run away and leave the family and go find shelter somewhere else. And the family pattern didn't stop there. Jacob, he reproduced this in his own family. He had a favorite of among his 12 sons named Joseph. And he loved Joseph so much that all the other sons forced Joseph to go away and to seek shelter somewhere. Actually, they sold him into slavery, but either way, they forced him to go away. So much like happened in that family dynamic, these lies about who we are and how we measure up get passed down from generation to generation. Jesus makes a curious comment about those who follow him. And it's related to what we're seeing here and where we try to seek our approval in our families, in our systems that we are part of. This is from Luke chapter 14. This is verses 25 through 27. So a large crowd was following Jesus, which was pretty typical for him. And he turned around and said to them, "If you want to be my disciple, you must, by comparison, hate everyone else. Your father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even your own life. Otherwise, you can't be my disciple. And if you do not carry your own cross and follow me, you cannot be your disciple." So Jesus is speaking to a culture that was an honor culture, meaning an honor culture that you lived your life trying to uphold the expectations of the group. So your worth as a person was defined by not bringing dishonor or shame onto the family. But Jesus' words to hate your family is a rejection of that. It's saying that how your family has impressed you or pushed you or what their expectations of you is not the source of who you are. Reject that family system. That's what it means to hate them. And let Jesus redefine how you think about yourself as you become his disciple. Now, for us, we live in the United States. We are primarily a guilt culture. We're not an honor and shame culture. And in our culture, you follow the rules to avoid guilt. So you seek to make things right when you break the rules. It's very much an individualistic mindset. But here's the beauty. Jesus' words apply equally well to us. We have to reject that we can earn value. We have to reject that we can make our own way or that we can be good enough. And where this comes full circle, when we don't understand the root of our core lies, we then end up projecting those lies back on God. And so here is where our spiritual life gets all bent out of shape. Our understanding gets clouded. So in my case, since approval was earned, that then formed the basis of my spiritual life. I would do Bible study and I would pray and I would serve others, and these really weren't ways for me to build into my relationship with God and to know him better and to put myself at the feet of Jesus. These were just ways for me to earn Jesus' approval. My hope that Jesus would think I was good enough. It was my pride. I don't need Jesus. I just need to have him let me try to be good enough. And that for me was a huge problem that missed the entire gospel message in my life. It's hard to feel grace and forgiveness when you have to constantly earn your approval. This was further corrupted for me because I then placed my performance as a pastor and a husband and a father on a scale of doing those things to earn God's affection. It was just a terrible cycle. And it led to me burning out and crashing and falling to rock bottom, like the prodigal son in the mud pit along with the pigs. So I had projected my lies onto God. I had given him attributes that nowhere in the Bible it says that he owns. And in addition to that, we also project our lies onto other people, but that's a completely different talk, and it would take even more time than I already have, and I'm running out. Here's the thing. Here's the example for us to follow, because we always want to end, we always want to wrap up with hope, and we always want to see, what does Jesus say about this? Well, the good news is that Jesus followed his own advice. This is Mark chapter 8. If you remember our Mark series, as we went through paragraph by paragraph on Mark, we saw a little bit of this. Mark chapter 8, Jesus and his disciples left Galilee and went up to the villages near Caesarea Philippi. As they were walking along, he, meaning Jesus, asked them, "Who do people say I am?" So Jesus is trying to put his thumb on the pulse of what are the expectations of him. What are people trying to conform him into? Well, they replied, some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, and others say you're one of the other prophets. Then Jesus asked him a little closer to home, but who do you say I am? He wants to know, who do the disciples, who are they pressing him in to be? What are they wanting him? What are they wanting from him? And Peter replied, "You are the Messiah." And Jesus warned them not to tell anybody about him. And at the time when we were talking about Mark, we said that Jesus' reason for not wanting them to tell is because they totally misunderstood. They knew he was the Messiah, but they didn't fully yet understand what that meant. They were going to push Jesus to be a false version of the Messiah. And so we see in this where Jesus says, be quiet, don't tell anybody yet. He is rejecting everybody's expectations of him. Jesus was fully committed to seeing himself and understanding himself in relation to God, rather than in the culture's expectations of what the Messiah should be. And this is the example for us. We have to fully reject our family systems, our our authority systems, any other financial, economic, any other systems we are part of, we have to reject their expectations on how we're supposed to behave and what we're supposed to produce and what our lives are supposed to be like. And the way we do this is found in John chapter 17. I'm going to read to you verses 16 and 17. This is part of Jesus' prayer for his disciples. And he says, "They," meaning his disciples, "do not belong to this world any more than I do." And then he asks God, "Make them holy by your truth. Teach them your word, which is truth." See, none of us belong to this world anymore as followers of Jesus. We are not bound by the world's expectations of how we are to measure up. So we are free from those lies that conform us to the world's image. And the way out found in John chapter 17 is by substituting truth for those lies. Now, substituting truth for the lies, this is not some process of inflating our ego by self-affirmation. If any of you are old enough to remember the Saturday Night Live sketch of Stuart Smalley, it was a guy who would sit in front of the mirror and say nice things to himself. You are good enough, you are smart enough, and hey, people like you. And the thought was, by saying that enough times, you would begin to believe it. But that's just another form of the lies. The truth is, we're often not good enough. We often do fail or stumble or do bad things. I mean, that's part of who we are living in this broken world. But they're not to form how we think about ourselves. The word that we have, the word that God gives us, tells us what is true about us regardless of circumstance, regardless of how we perform, regardless of how people think of us. What we read in the Bible is that the purest, truest, most excellent thing about any of us is that we're loved by God. You can take that to the bank. That should be the thing that plays on the record that goes on over and over in our brain. And Jesus is the testimony and proof of that love. That's the summary. That's the summary of who we are and how God sees it. So how do we get there to where we can actually believe that and live that out and have that be the truth that we live by? Well, Psalm 119 says it really well. It says, "I have hidden your word in my heart that I might not sin against you." You see, lying is a sin, right? We know that. We know that from the 10 Commandments, and that includes telling lies about ourselves. So the way past this is hiding those true words about us in our hearts. Now, hiding that word in our heart, that doesn't just mean memorizing or become familiar. What it means is letting that truth become the basis of your identity. It means letting that become part of you and part of who you are. You digest it, you internalize it so that they become part of your being. And we cooperate with the Holy Spirit to change our mindset so that in a moment of stress or duress or failure, we don't automatically turn on those lies. Instead, we can turn on the truth and say, I am beloved by God no matter what, because I am in Jesus. And so for me, this began by repeating to myself that I am noticed by the God who even notices the sparrow. That I don't have to earn his approval, that in Jesus I am already approved of. That I've been chosen by him, not for anything that I've done. And these are just a couple of the truths among many others that help me not fall into the trap of my core lies. Now, I know that might be a hard thing for you to figure out, okay, what's the truth that speaks to this lie that I identified a little earlier in today's message? And I think that's great. If you are to that point, then here's a resource I have for you. I have a sheet of paper that has 90 statements about your identity. that you can read through and you can see which ones apply to you most directly as far as addressing those lies. If you need one of those, email me at scott@thecrossingchurch.org. I have an electronic copy I will send to you so that you can read through it. In fact, if you want to have a conversation about this and say, hey, Scott, here's what I am noticing bubble up in me as you were asking me the question, how are you really? I'd love to talk with you. I would love to help you define what that lie is so that we can talk about the truth that we would speak to that lie. So here's the question that I want you to take away today, and I want you to meditate on. What is true about you and who you are and how God sees you? Please pray with me. God, thank you so much that who we are and how you see us and how you relate to us is not dependent on what we do, on the things that we have, on whether we have been successful or abject failures in our relationships and in feeding our daughters while we're running errands. God, I'm thankful for grace that allows us to stumble, but then get back up and to continue to look towards you. So God, I pray for all of us as we are thinking about how are we really, that you would give each of us the wisdom to discern what's going on in us. What are those lies that hold me captive? And God, I pray that you would provide the freedom that you promise. God, thank you so much that you have demonstrated your love for us through Jesus. And I am just thankful that I can say, and everyone listening to this can say, that the truest thing about us is that we are loved by you. And thank you in the name of Jesus. Amen. God bless you guys. Have a great week.